This is our second live event. I feel like everybody knows Sarah Longacre and Wendy Longacre-Brown. They are our guests today, and we're so excited to have them.
We've all had birth, and we're all going to have death. I don't think any of us right now are, hopefully.
Well, if we do, we've got someone here to help us.
You were my doula for my second baby.
I mean, let's cut to the chase. I saw your vagina with the head coming
It's
out.
true. That is true. There are no photos. We are not going to be showing that today. So
Can we add that to the podcast episode? No. Supat says no.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
We're so happy you guys are here. We cannot believe it. This is our second live event, and we've tripled the number.
Yeah, we did
people.
triple. And we appreciate it. It looks good. We have an aisle and everything down the middle.
The moment we have been waiting for. I feel like everybody knows Sarah Longacre and Wendy Longacre-Brown. They are our guests today, and we're so excited to have them. We're going to talk about birth and death and everything in between. We have a beautiful birth doula, an end-of-life doula, and so many incredible stories that they're going to share with us. And we're going to have a moment at the end for questions, if anyone has questions. And we are just going to dive into the
We are
intros.
going to dive in. I want to welcome everybody as well. This has been just an incredible place to do our first live recording last time. And Nick, thank you for offering again. And we added 30 more chairs, and it worked out well. And anyway, so I'm really, really excited. This was so much fun last time, and it went really well. It videoed beautifully in the studio. So while we wish there was a whole nother section so we could do 100 more people, welcome to this edition of We're Not Fine. We're very excited for this topic. It's we've all had birth, and we're all going to have death. I don't think any of us right now are, hopefully.
Well, if we do, we've got someone here to help us.
Wow, that's a good catch.
If anyone's pregnant, I'm here.
I do not.
So
have
whoever
CPR,
lost this
do not.
bracelet. Anyway.
Okay, first of all, let Doug and I introduce ourselves. So I'm Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen.
Doug Jensen,
Yep.
and we've been doing this podcast for about a year and a half. This is my handsome husband / bartender.
My
right
pod
there,
husband.
Rob. Yes, I have a house husband and a pod husband.
Yep.
And this podcast, We're Not Fine, it's all about relationships and mental health issues. And we found that every single topic under the sun ties into relationships. And
It sure does. I mean, we kind of started very focused on that. And really, everything we're going to talk about today affects so many people. So very personal stories for the two of you, but everybody in your life has been involved in your story. So we're very excited to have you here. And of course, we are clinicians, mental health clinicians. We're psychotherapists. So we really take a mental health point of view on all of the symptoms that we might be talking about today as well. We're going to keep it as light as we can, though.
And quick intro of our beautiful team here. We've got Supak on the drums. Just kidding. She's our producer. And we've got Jeff and John, who are our AV guys. Okay, without further ado, I get to introduce Sarah Longacre, the one and only. And I met you 16 years ago when I was pregnant for the first time. And I was like, what is this amazing studio called Bluma? And it was yoga and all things prenatal and motherhood. And I feel like it was all about community. And there has been nothing since. This just a one-of-a-kind experience. And so it's so funny because there are two other lovely ladies here, Amber and Jamie, that we were in your, we were your guinea pigs. We were your first class.
Jamie was actually one of my first models too. She was all over the website. Yeah.
And she was my first prenatal yoga teacher. And I was like, we're going to be best friends. And I was right. I'm psychic.
Funny, she was mine too for prenatal.
Oh, I knew it. I knew you were there. Yeah. Sarah is just fantastic. And everyone knows her, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You were my doula for my second baby.
I mean, let's cut to the chase. I saw your vagina with the head coming
It's
out.
true. That is true.
like-
There are no photos. We are not going to be showing that today. So
Can we add that to the podcast episode? No. Supak says no.
Supak says no. She's our HR department. Actually, Supak's
Jamie
wife is our our HR. 22 years of prenatal yoga experience, birth doula experience. And a mere 18 years of prenatal yoga.
It'll be 20 this November that I taught my very first class. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I know.
And you have this wild entrepreneurial spirit.
Some days.
Some days. And you had a podcast of your own called Belly Up.
I did. I had a podcast that's pausing right now. It was called Belly Up. And most people think that because I'm a birth doula and I own a prenatal yoga studio, that it was about literally belly, but I actually just really like to drink, and I really like conversation. So the whole idea is belly up to the bar. So I have guests just like you guys in person. They pick a cocktail. Some people on the audience today have been. My dear friend Sarah Branyan was a surrogate. So we just have all different conversations, and I believe that the platform of podcasts is beyond education. It's community.
Yeah, it is.
And it's been really a wonderful choice that I made as well. So we'll bring it back.
It's okay to take a pause, have a cocktail.
I'm learning that. Yeah.
Have a cocktail and belly up.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or just take a nap.
Absolutely.
For
I have
the
not
whole
done
winter.
anything prenatal. I have to come clean on that. It has not happened
But
for me.
rumor has
However,
it you were at your children's birth.
I was at one of them. The other is adopted.
Yes.
So yeah,
you
I have seen it, and I have seen vaginas.
Yes.
I
You
can tell you that too.
Can
As
we
a
get
gay
a round
man,
of applause?
As a gay man, I've seen vaginas.
You
yeah.
have. Congratulations.
But I want to introduce Wendy. Hello. Beautiful. Hi. Hello. Did you? You got this beautiful dark. Can you do that again? Hello, Wendy. Wendy Longacre-Brown is a trained and certified end-of-life doula and legacy creator through International End-of-Life Doula Association, INELDA, I think is the acronym. She's also trained in Healing Touch, which I'm fascinated by. I'd like to hear more. She currently serves as the membership coordinator and is one of the founding members of the Minnesota Death Collaborative. And I told you, Wendy, like one of my major interests has been since I've worked in HIV and AIDS since the early 90s, and death was a predominant factor of that pandemic. Mm-hmm. I've worked with death and dying since graduate school, and I would love to hear more from you and kind of your experience. Luckily people are on medications now that keep them alive, but there's still complications, but it's been around me forever. Yeah. So, and boy, was that tough and traumatizing. So I'm going to look forward to this.
Yeah.
So we have our birth, we have our death, and they also are here to talk about this incredible experience they had with their beautiful mom, who I met a few times at Luma, Cheryl. And she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she did something really brave that you don't really hear much about. It's voluntarily stopping eating and drinking to hasten the dying process, which it sounds like it was like a family decision. We're going to hear all about it. We don't know much about it, but we want to hear that experience as well. Oh, and you guys have been really on Star Trib, Kathy Wurzer, NPR.
Wendy just got top 5 stories of 2023 on NPR.
Amazing. That's incredible.
We're honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
How sweet. And it's interesting. I think one of the greatest places we might start this podcast is by learning more about what a doula is. One of our AV guys said, "What's a doula?" early to me.
Yes.
And so maybe start a little bit. I'd love to hear how you two got interested, but also like, what is it?
Sure. Well, I think it's just really important to acknowledge that 2 sisters born and raised in Minneapolis.
Yep.
I came back here because of being a birth doula 20 years ago this week. I moved back actually. And just really the reality, we have many of our best friends here tonight that we're super open about it. We're very different people. We sound a lot alike, I would say, our voices.
Although when she said hello.
I know she did. I don't know if I can do that. She does. But just really two very different personalities. And the fact, I mean, our mom would always say when she was with us, I have the bookends. I have the bookends of the doulas, and just how special that was. So I can start a little bit with my journey. Back in 2000, when I lived in Portland, Oregon, I worked for Nike as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, and had this literally a dream job. I mean, it was a dream job. I worked with samples and photo shoots. I hired models. I traveled. And most importantly, I had a 401k and a steady paycheck and a kick-ass campus with all these young, beautiful people, which many of them were between the ages of, let's say, 28 and 45, right? Portland, Oregon. And I lived in Portland when it was hippie, not hipster. It is now. And I literally heard of this word doula, a birth doula. And I asked my neighbor who was telling me that she had a birth doula. I said, what? And she described what it was. And it just, this feeling landed in me. It's very cheesy. And I rarely blush, but I feel blushy when I say this, that ever since I was a little girl, I really have been obsessed with the pregnant body.
Wow.
I used to take a pillowcase underneath my robe, my pajamas when I was little, and our home right here in Minneapolis, and I would pretend I was pregnant. I'm quite surprised it actually wasn't a teenage pregnancy because I was always so excited to be pregnant myself. So I found out through this neighbor what a doula is. So a birth doula is emotional and physical support. I do add in the word spiritual. Emotional, physical, and spiritual support for families in birth and in pregnancy. So right away, if we just close our eyes and envision, what does this person looks like? They are a coach, they're a tour guide, they're a cheerleader. We are your rock through pregnancy and through the birthing process. Personally, people are like, oh, you must love babies. I don't like babies. I'm not a baby person.
Oh my God, me neither.
Oh my God, no.
You just like the body.
Well, I'm just like, no, I leave when the baby comes.
You like to nurse. I think you like
I
to
like
nurse.
to nurse.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't want to like, yeah. That was fine.
Really, who doesn't?
I liked my own kid, kind of. I like her a lot now, but.
Are they in the audience?
She's not. I wanted her to
That
come,
is
but
really
she's like, I'm so over you and Wendy talking about Nani and all of it. But
amazing.
So basically, we are there as your advocate. We don't do anything medical. But really, I mean, picture you're going to a country you've never been to before. You don't know the currency.
Yep.
You don't know the language. I've been to this country. And every birth is different.
Yep.
But I'm going to be your person with you through high and through low. And we meet prior. And I've got some dear doula friends in the audience, so I want to make sure I'm hitting all the spots, is that we are your one consistent.
Yep.
So I'm just going to use Talia, right? So Talia hired me because I went to her home, sat with she and Rob, talked about, what are you looking for in your birth? Another misconception. They think that I don't want a natural birth. If you have a scheduled cesarean, if you know you want pain management, you actually need a doula even more, because there are so many more complications that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
And we want to hold that space. So I go to Rob and Talia's house, we talk about the highs and lows of birth, and then I'm on call. And so I get a good old call at 2 a.m. or whatever it is, and I go meet the family in their home. I then continue with them either to a birth center, the hospital, or I will stay if they're having a home birth. And I am the one person that they've already met. They already know my voice. They know my touch. We've made this deep connection because birthing is, just like death, one of the most vulnerable things that you can do.
Yeah.
You have to surrender to completely transform. And not only is a baby born, but you as a human are born, and your partner's born. Your family has totally changed. And you need someone to be there to say, this is normal. You are okay. Let me get you something to eat and to drink. That nurse that is there, they have a lot to do medically, and you've never met them. What if they're really bad juju? You're like, who is this person? I'm the one that they know.
Right.
I'm the one that the dad looks at and I'm like, you need to go take a break. And he's like, I do. This is scary. Or the partner.
Yep.
So yeah, that's my role, is to be the coach and the advocate and the cheerleader. And then I stay for a couple hours after the birth, and then I'm ready to go home.
See you later, belly's up.
I'm going to stay off topic, as I usually do, or off the agenda here. I have multiple questions. So how does the medical community invite you in? Like, do they feel welcoming?
Well, it's so interesting. I was thinking, 20 years ago, it was like, what's a doula? What's a doula? What's a doula?
Yep.
Now no offense, but now most people do.
Jeff.
in our kind of age range, we know. And the crazy part is, I've been a doula for this long. One of my first clients, he's engaged. Like, he knows what a doula is. When he has a baby, he'll be choosing a doula. So it's becoming more of a household name, the birth doula piece. So does that,
It totally explains it. And obviously the medical community is more welcoming of you coming into that birth center and being a part
It took a while, Doug. It took a while.
I mean,
I will say that first decade, like you got the look of like, stay out of my territory, bitch. Like it was tough. It was ugly. And I am really good at kissing ass. So I'm really, really good doula.
Well, I was going to ask if you were more confrontational, because you were you were this amazing advocate. And the best part is it's exactly like you said, this country we've never been to, and you were like, do you need chapstick? Do you need a warm blanket? Do you want a foot massage?
I hopefully didn't ask, because that's my big thing as a doula. You don't ask, because I don't want to put you in your head. I just brought you that lip gloss that I still carry in my bag that has a little mint tint.
My lips are still glistening.
Thank you.
Do male partners get lip gloss too?
Male partners get so much love from me, because a lot of times, that's the big thing too, is that people are like, well, no, my partner can do it. They can. But I have to remind you, they're also watching this person that they love going through the most physical and emotional intensity than they have ever done. I mean, let's get real. It's a small hole and it's a human being, and it has to come out. Like it's
going to draw you a diagram.
Hey, I had gallstones. I know what it is. Anybody?
So close. She's going to be so close.
Our mother passed kidney stones.
Our mom passed kidney stones while she was
delivering our brother.
Yeah.
Holy shit, that was hard. Painful. I won't beat it. Let me ask you as well. Are there male birth doulas?
It's a great question for some of my doulas. I know that there was one in Colorado, right, Sarah? Yeah, one in Denver, because he had 3 daughters, and his daughters each asked if he would be at their birth. And then they started passing out their dad's name, like, he's really great, which is interesting. My daughter was born at my father's home. He lived on a farm in Stillwater. My mother was, sorry, Mom, I still feel bad, but she was not invited to any one of Wendy's 3 births or my 2 births. And my dad was a total rock. I mean, he was great. So it's all about just the energy that we're bringing to the room. Yep. We want the birthing person to feel seen. We want them to feel heard. And at the end of the day, when they are holding their baby, we want them to say, I knew all my choices. I picked the ones that I needed and that I wanted. And I felt taken care of. Because we know that this transformative stage in a human's life, you give birth and then you all of a sudden take this thing home and you're like, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah.
We know that their birth affects the way that they feel about themselves and the treatment that they had. Yep. And so that's where the medical community is really starting to pivot and say, we need you. COVID's one of the best things that's happened to doulas, because when we were kicked out of the hospital for about 2 months, they said, nope, bring them back. We need them. So yeah, we're getting there.
Love it all. And now we have entering life and leaving life.
It is, I love listening because there's so many similarities. I mean, it's how I knew right away when I heard about the word death doula, which I didn't know about at all.
When did you hear about it? How did you hear about it?
So a few months after our uncle had died, Sarah and I took a course called Speaking of Dying, where you met with a small group of people and filled out your healthcare directive. And it actually was taught by the midwife that I had for my last 2 children. So it was sort of all comes together in a lovely, beautiful circle of relationships.
She left midwifery and decided she really wanted to focus on the end of life.
Yeah, so she facilitated this. And actually in that particular Speaking of Dying course, we learned about VSED, we learned about all these things about options. So I kept thinking, I don't know if I want to be a facilitator, if I'm a teacher, but there's an interest in here. Yep. And I was standing at my island in the kitchen and on the phone with Sarah, and you said, well, there are death doulas. And the moment she said it, it's like when you know this is your spouse, or like you need to move something, like this is it. Yep. So it took about a year for me to sit with it, because in our family, we had loss. Our mother lost her parents in the world's worst plane crash in 1977.
Oh.
Oof,
so we had dealt with grief. Yep. And so it wasn't necessarily taboo to talk about death. But I also had a sense that for being in a family, we talk about anything. I didn't know how to
Sometimes
approach.
too much.
Yeah, often too much. I was finding myself, aside from good friends, I felt like, this is such a sensitive topic. How do I want to go about this? So it took me about a year to first volunteer in many hospice scenarios.
Well, can we just pause too? Because when we took that course that year, I had lost my daughter at 21 weeks in utero, and Wendy came to the birth. And then we had lost our uncle, my mother's brother, which is a huge part of the story. But you had seen death, and I think you were even questioning, like, why are we handling it this way? Or who's here for this, for Sarah? Who's here for, all of the layers? So I think you had like those perfect kind of puzzle pieces come together.
Completely.
Well, I want to jump on that a little bit. So first of all, I'm sorry for your loss. That's really tragic, of course. And I can't imagine how complicated. But I will tell you, I'm kind of curious what you saw. Like, what was it about that experience where you saw people struggling with death or struggling to be supportive or talking it through? Because, you and I both know, Wendy, that this is something that people don't talk about well.
Right.
And these healthcare declaratives or directives that people are now encouraged to do in the hospitals freak people the fuck out.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a really difficult topic to think about, like, how do I want to die? What am I comfortable doing?
And we'd hear these facts that, 7 out of 10 people want to die in the hospital. 6 out of 10 do. Like they're not, because they're not having discussions with their doctors.
7 out of 10 want to die at home.
I'm sorry. 7 out of 10 want to die at home, and 7 out of 10 die in the hospital. And so it's not exactly, the odds are, unless you're talking about it before, unless you have a very clear healthcare directive and you've been having discussions with your spouse, and even if you have filled out your healthcare directive and the right people don't have it, so there's all of these elements to it. But even before that, there was this very clear, like, no one is talking about this. And I could get a sense in the community that there were more discussions that were just kind of lingering. And even I mean, as Sarah said, somebody who has always been in a family that can talk about everything. And at this point, our mother really was interested in talking about her life. So I think that helped. She was diagnosed a couple years after about this time that I was interested in becoming a doula. And so she had learned at that point that there was this option to VSED. And so even way before we were in the midst of it, we knew that she had a very strong opinion that she wanted to not go into the final stages of Alzheimer's. So that was all a part of it. And it was also, there was a group called the Threshold Network in the Twin Cities that talk about green burial and home services. But there wasn't necessarily a community that was supporting end-of-life doulas and both educating people about what doulas do, which I'll get to, and also just learning from each other. And so to answer your question, though, about as far as what death doulas do, it's very similar. I mean, it's almost to a T.
Chapstick.
Yeah, chapstick is helpful. We have our tinctures. I have so many tinctures. I'm a tincture guy. Yeah.
My friend Allison does too.
But it's emotional, physical, spiritual support around end of life. And that can, hopefully it starts as soon as the diagnosis is set in, or potentially before. So, I mean, we do meet with people if it's at a stage in their life where they want to create a legacy, but there's no reason to think that they're going to die anytime soon, but they really want to start writing down what their heart will is and what they want to be remembered for. And if something did happen, what they want it to look like. If they want to be surrounded by these 5 people, they want the smell to be vanilla, and they want to make sure that they're touched at all times, and that they want to make sure their family is there at their last breath. So, there's a lot of choices and decisions that you can make. I mean, as a 50-year-old, I have a healthcare directive that it's funny. My thought process around death continues to change, and so there's that, which I love. I'm constantly learning about through experiences. I remember in the beginning, I was watching a documentary about a death where they brought the body home right away. It was unexpected. And at first it was a bit shocking. And then after maybe 6 months, a year, I thought, oh yeah, that is what I would want. You can see how grief is, and this is just in general, like when you're talking about it more, when you're involving the family, mortality doesn't seem so scary. And, it is something where, there's a lot of introspection that we're doing, but when you're planful, you can be present.
Well, I think just obviously we talk all the time. She's like, oh, I just left a client's house. The wife called. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's. 2 out of the 3 kids are very on board for this and this and this. But think about this wife now. I'm just using an example. Like, has Wendy now, just like Talia had me, to call, to lean on. This is what's happening. And then she goes over and sits with them. What does this process look like? How can we make it so that it's a peaceful, everyone feels heard, everyone. And she is that tour guide, that coach, that support, and the resources, because we don't have the answers to all of these things. And we lean on all of our teams of friends and birth doulas and death doulas to support. So I mean, it's like, it's not just the 2 of us. We have so much backing.
Right. Right. So, it is both having, I think Sarah and I both can have that like equanimity where you're just able to balance the stress and the beauty and just find that middle ground really well. But it is making sure that they're using all the resources, because like a birth doula, we aren't able to be a part of any of the medical side. But the sooner that you bring a doula in, the sooner you probably will bring hospice in, because that's extremely important, and we need hospice. But we will be the ones that are more consistently next to our clients, because that's just the way that healthcare is right now with hospice.
I will tell you, this just brings up so many questions for me. And again, I think watching people with AIDS die in the really rough time of the epidemic, there were so many complicating factors with family, et cetera, and wills and all that sort of the legalities when gay marriage was not legal. I want to ask, and I know this is probably a silly question now that I'm asking it, but is there anybody who does not have a diagnosis who has approached you? And I'm talking about like suicide assistance. I know there's a legality about this, but.
Well, we don't call it assisted suicide. Because it's just, so because that it is really, suicide is so different from having a planful, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, or having a diagnosis that is terminal. I think it's very different. One is a position that's very much about like self-will and self-determination, where there is a diagnosis like for your mother or someone with AIDS or cancer who's going to go through a difficult process. Do people approach you when there's not a health condition? I've never been approached by anyone as far as helping them with a suicide, if that's what you're asking me.
I am.
Okay. No, but it's
cut to that chase.
No. It's a hot topic.
Like somebody who just doesn't want to live in this fucking crazy world of ours, right?
But it is a very hot topic, because
I know
a lot of people probably know in this room that the End of Life Minnesota Act is heading to the legislature this week. And so
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. So, there are 11 out of 50 states that have medical aid in dying already passed. And so there's a lot of education that it needs to be very clear, just the difference even between medical aid in dying and VSED. And there's confusion, because there are unfortunately a lot of people that think that it will be abused, and that if someone that is depressed would get their hands on it. But the reality, just to be clear, is that you do need a 6-month or less to live diagnosis.
I hear you. Yep. And that's my understanding as well. But one of the things that you and I both experience in our practice is that, the political and the George Floyd's murder and the pandemic, these have caused so much stress for people that are just like done. They're like, I just don't know what the point of all of this is anymore. So I'm just very clear that the suicide rates are up significantly in our nation as well.
I might suggest therapy as an alternative.
There's that.
What is therapy?
And some yoga.
Yes, and yoga. I wanted to jump. Were you in the middle?
I have 2 more questions.
Yeah. Of course you do. Do you?
You can take your turn, though.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to jump on something that you said that I was just thinking, like yin yang, light dark, to the bookends, like you and I. Good cop, bad cop.
Avoidant, direct.
What he said. That you meet in the middle with this helping families with stress and beauty. It's like stress and beauty in both of them. Because what I'm picturing is that you sit with this like crescendo of excitement and joy and stress and panic, but it's like celebration. Yeah. And that you're sitting in so much grief, and everybody is, it's just beautiful to think about people all sitting together to experience this together. But we're going to dive into existential crisis stuff later because I feel like there's so much fear around death that I just can't even imagine what it would be like being like, I'm holding your hand, but I don't know where you're going. Good luck.
Well, that brings
That's
up...
probably not what you said.
Well, and I don't feel like I don't want to feel like I'm defending this. So stop me, Wendy, if this feels like it. But it's so interesting because it is grief, but because the doula and depending what death it is,
it can be a celebration too.
I mean, my mom is free. Like, she's not in pain, and like her death was a fucking 10-day long process, but there was so much celebration for what we have here on earth and what we are able to do and the love. So, I mean, there is, and it's just, it's, if you look at when you look at major cultures who know how to do death, there is so much mourning and grieving and all of the good stuff, and there is celebration. And I think that's one of the pieces that we are not getting right in this country.
I agree.
You know, like I'm so careful now when someone's like, oh, I have a funeral today, instead of me being like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, I'm like, I hope they lived a really kick-ass life. Yeah. You know, it's like, how do we just change that conversation? So, but it's totally yin and yang. It's absolutely.
Yeah, but I don't look at it as a yin yang at all. I really don't. I think there's so many more similarities. Even just that kind of like the lineal space that right in the midst of death and birth. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we're really good at that, is because, like, you know, there can be like perseverance and you know, anxiousness before, then we can help our clients plan and work through resentment and unresolved issues and guilt, shame, all those things that come both with birth and death. And then in that lineal phase of feeling out, holding hand, holding space, being able
vulnerable.
Right. And also making sure that, you know, that the spouse is being able to be the spouse and not the caretaker, and really observing. A lot of it is observing. Because they want to know after, like, what they want to know about the nature that was going on outside. They want to know about the phone calls. They want to know the eye rolls that happened in the other room. They want to know all of it. They do. I mean, like, there's a lot that goes on that people are.
Well, and the statistics show if you just physically have someone in the room holding space through death or through the birth process, the satisfaction, I mean, that's such an interesting word to say, but like the care is there. There's so much that Wendy and I don't have to say, but it's just physically being there.
You could feel the support.
Yeah.
I just want to say that you talked about like families who can have these conversations and that there isn't always agreement. Right. Like, and I want to hear your personal story about that. But, you know, I will also say that I have 2 kids. And when I talk to them about this is how I want to die and this is what I'm looking for, and feel free to pull that plug if I can't recognize you or something like this, my children are like, stop talking to me. And I'm like, well, I got to do it anyway.
You got to write it down, maybe.
But the big question is, and you feel free not to answer this necessarily, Wendy, but I'm kind of curious in your role, you're going to come across a lot of spiritual beliefs about what is after this life, right? Would you be willing to comment on what you think it is? And you don't have to do that. I'm curious if that guides your work.
Well, it does. And I have to be careful because I have a very clear, you know, and to that point, I have to truly show up with.
So you don't have to answer.
Well, no, I'll answer. But I have to show up where my client is. And I think that was
right?
what I was taught by another doula right in the beginning when I was,
course.
Because I'm a fixer.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that validated here? Sarah
But
validates.
I've learned that I can't be with this. And so, I mean, I think so that's kind of the coolest part about my job, is that I continue to learn more about myself and grow. I mean, I'm serious. I've been thinking about this a lot these days. I think, you know what? I'm a little bit more of a patient. I listen to people, and I'm not trying to like make everything perfect.
That's a skill.
It's hard.
She should practice that on me sometime.
Yeah.
Hint.
But
we're available to negotiate.
I strongly believe that our spirits stay with us for quite a long time, be it in the room or just around our lives. So what I so often want to say to clients is that, like, you know, your relationship doesn't end right here.
Yep. And don't be scared.
And don't be and don't be scared. But you have to.
Easier said than done.
Right, but it is, because, you know, and I think I didn't truly understand that until the loss of my mom, until more like 6, 7, 8 months after she had died, that I really felt like, oh, you're here now, because you were out there for a while, but I feel you all the time. And so, and it doesn't always happen that way for everybody. So I think that's why the post-death work is just as important, and really getting to know what the client's beliefs are.
And that's, I mean, one of the biggest similarities between a death and a birth doula, that I have no agenda. I mean, someone could say like, oh, so I have to have a natural birth. Oh, so you come in and do this. My agenda is I'm there to support you. And I can't bring in my own stuff. And I'm really, it's taken a lot of births, but that's what we do. I mean, whatever your religious belief, spiritual belief, however there's no right, wrong way to birth and to die. As long as you feel supported and, so it's like we come in with, what do you need?
Yeah. And there have been times where I've had clients who had things that they wish their spouse would have said. I'm sorry.
Like what?
Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. I there was some things that happened and I am sorry. And I had a client who I connected with a medium, and it was she thought that I had communicated with her before and given her all this information because what she heard from her husband was so helpful and so unbelievable. And so sometimes that works, that you actually can connect to resources that really, and then sometimes there's just some deep sadness that we can't help and that we do need to find a therapist, or that certain rituals of letting go isn't all that they need. They're needing some another level of support that doulas don't provide necessarily.
And it's not all that different than what Talia and I do in our professional offices. We stay where the client is. We don't necessarily get to have opinions on what their honest life is or what their goals are unless it's hurting somebody, right?
Right.
So I kind of love how you two
following people one step ahead. That like you roll out the red carpet.
That's so funny. I say that all the time. I'm like, I'm always 30 minutes ahead of you at a birth. I'm always, because then I want to give options. What is the benefit of this? What is the risk of this? What is an alternative of this? What does your intuition say?
Felt that, yes.
Yeah. So you're always just kind of that next beat while being completely present.
And it's their choice. Like
absolutely.
Their adventure.
And they ask all the time, well, what would you do? What would you do? And I so appreciate that, but I'm very clear, like, this is not mine. And they're like, well, really, what would you do?
But really?
And I'm like, well, I don't want any more kids. I wouldn't be here, but.
Because you kind of just like the one that you have as it is.
My one.
Okay,
I
just
do.
kind of.
I'm with you.
I'm sorry to interrupt your line of thinking. Thank you for answering that question. It's a complicated question, right?
It is.
And I'm guessing you get asked it even by families, like, what is your belief? Like, do you believe what we believe? And you can help us differently if that's the case. But
surprisingly, it doesn't come up that often.
I am fascinated with
that.
Yeah, that amazes me because I'm picturing that if I were on my deathbed, I'd be like, okay, what do you know? Who's coming to get me?
I might do that
right.
Like, is it heaven and hell for you? Because you're out, if that's the case for you. So I love your answer, by the way.
Jews don't have heaven and hell.
No, you don't.
We don't.
No.
So where am I going?
Neither do I. Our psychic told us where we're going.
Atlanta.
Candyland?
Do you say Atlantis?
Atlantis?
Yeah.
Atlantis City?
Right. I just wanted to share this really interesting parallel that it might not come up. So I just thought, Wendy and I have been a birth doula and a death doula for 2 families. So the couple gave birth and he passed 6 months later, and Wendy was their death doula.
The father did?
Well, that's painful.
This past summer, a year and a half ago, she was probably 30 weeks. Her husband died of cancer at home. Wendy was the death doula. She called me a month later to be her birth doula.
Oh my God.
So
that's
I like
powerful.
that, those 2 families, just thinking of what has,
But
you have a good referral source.
It is, and it just makes me feel even more existential dread. Just kidding, not really. But just that it feels so transient, that it can be happening at the same time in the same room with the same family.
Literally.
I don't like it.
No. It's tough. It's tough.
Who's going to make me feel better about my existential dread?
I'll help you.
You rocked your birth. There you go.
There.
Your vagina.
Am I going to rock my death? That's the question. My vagina rocked my birth.
Your vagina rocks. Anyway,
Thank you.
You had a question you were asking. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Do you lovely ladies have any highlights and cautionary tales of experiences that you've had? Like if you have been in the most vulnerable moments for people, of just thinking about like Were there things that people wished they had done? Were there regrets?
Well, Sarah has so many. So I was like, which one's Sarah going to pick? I have visuals of a lot of yours. Like, not quite making it to the hospital, like all those.
I've caught a few babies, but no, you go first.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit about, to be honest, I mean, I had the gift of holding my sister's daughter when she was, right out of, I'd say she had been alive for
an hour. She'd been born for an hour.
Yeah, and her heart had stopped like right before. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't see myself in that position. It was before I was a doula. And but I also knew that in that moment, I didn't know anything about doula work as far as death doula work, but I felt like it was a strange feeling because it was terribly heartbreaking, yet it was such a gift to be able to be there for Sarah.
It was so funny too. I birthed with my doula and my husband. He was my husband.
Oh my God, did you make that up? I love it.
She did.
I have heard it before, but I'm going to give her
really
credit.
good.
No, my new fiance, but no. And I, like, the moment I gave birth, I said, call Wendy. Like, I just knew, and this is why I know she's such a great death doula. Like, I just needed her energy there. Like, I couldn't have my mom. I needed Wendy. And so when she came and held Sophia, it was so important.
Oh,
it was so important.
And I think it was the holding, and it was also when I had to take her away from Sarah. But I think it was like a timing thing. And I think I could see how someone needed a good period of time to be with this unborn child, this like beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we held her for about 3 hours, but yeah, I mean, probably the worst moment ever in my life.
Sure.
And you had to have your sister do it. You're just like screaming. You're like, no, just screaming as she takes your daughter away, and you're never going to hold her again.
Just an impossible moment.
But I will say, like, really clearly and honestly, Sophia Love is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I knew the moment I was pregnant that her life was not viable. I knew she was here to teach me something, and she changed my life in ways I won't discuss on this, but I wouldn't be who I am today.
And I just want to observe that this is how grief works as well. No. It doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. It is with us. Any number of things can trigger it. So thank you for feeling comfortable sharing your emotions about this as well.
Fucking job. So we lost our mom in June, and I'm like,
make it stop.
Waving the white flag.
Yeah. But grief does, because I could be there, but I didn't know how to do that grief either.
Well, and it's personal to you, Wendy. This is your niece. Yeah. So it's a very different situation.
But I do find myself looking back and I'm like, wow, didn't really show up that way or that way. So I had, in a way, it was a gift. It was a gift that I could be there for Sarah and experience this with her, not a gift to lose this child. And then also times when I've seen families that have been at odds, and I've brought them together right at the end over this one particular family over like an anointment ceremony where
I thought you were going to say like an annoying brother or something.
Anointment. So you're washing the body.
And anoint?
No, it is the most beautiful ritual that Wendy taught us after my mom died. And anyone that has anyone die, I'm like, you have to do this ritual. It is unbelievable.
Wow.
Because it gives people a pause. A pause to be with this person who they've loved, who they've watched. So millions of dresses and so this was this mother who, thank you.
I appreciate that.
And we could talk about each part of her body. We could talk about her brain as a principal. We could talk about her hands that played the guitar, so we did all of these.
The lips that spoke, the lips that kiss us. You touch each piece. And then you're like, the ears that listen. And we were like, oh, Mom wasn't a great listener. I'm just kidding.
That doesn't count.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, but to do it with this family about 3-4 years ago, it was one of the first times I had worked with a family in this way. And so I I could see them laughing and singing, but knowing that they had had such struggles before.
Wow.
And then to get a phone call that night from the sister who had hired me and just said, I am so much more settled than I ever imagined to be because of that time. It was some of those moments in the beginning of this career that I thought, this is why I'm doing this.
Because you realize like none of that shit matters. Like it's all so petty and earthly. And then when you're sitting in the presence of birth and death, it's all about love and all about relationship. And I mean, hopefully it's a wake-up call.
It's unbelievable to what, you know, Wendy was Mom's main person for 4 years talking about this. And I always had to take huge breaks because Wendy wanted to talk about Mom's death way more than I did. I was like, my mom's death is going to be the death of us because but she was so intentional. And so we have to think about this, we have to think about this. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to think about any of this. I don't want to think about any of this. I don't want her to die. I don't want to do this. This doesn't sound, I have to watch my mom not eat. No, like not in favor. So then luckily, a few weeks, months before my mom started VSED on May 18th, we met with 2 other death doulas, and they came every single day, and they did ritual, and they just sat. And I mean, there was times I was texting him like, it wasn't all pretty and bringing people together. My brother and I had the worst fight of our life ever during her death.
I'm really wondering if you two might back up and tell us this story.
Yeah, sure.
You know, as everybody is now probably hearing these bits and pieces. It feels very fresh, and you're giving us a beautiful story.
Like, I love talking about it, yeah.
Well, that's good.
You want to start us?
Well, so as I mentioned before, we had learned about voluntarily stopping eating and drinking in March 2017. Mom read the book, I think 1 year later, and then she was diagnosed the next year. Wow. And this book, Choosing to Die, is about a woman who, Phyllis Schrachter is her name, and she helped her husband, Alan, who had Alzheimer's, who had watched his mother die from Alzheimer's and knew that he didn't want to do it this way, but didn't know that it was an option until I think it was like a friend who was a doctor / therapist or something helped him, brought it to his attention. And so after this, it was...
Well, and prior to this, we'd mentioned my uncle. So my grandparents, as Wendy mentioned, died in the largest plane crash in history. The only sibling was my mom and Uncle Wilbill. And Uncle Wilbill wasn't married. Growing up, he was married 15 years ago. His wife, and he lived in Ely, and we watched him suffer and went into a home and, you know, couldn't talk, couldn't wipe himself. I mean, how do you, crawling on the floor? I mean,
same diagnosis, did you say?
Yes, Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's a horrible illness, right?
It's the devil. It's horrible. And so we would go visit him and we would leave and my mom would say,
I'm not doing
please, we have to do it a different way. So between that and then the parallel of Wendy getting this book, we were introduced to VSED.
Mm-hmm.
And can I ask, so you have a sibling, a brother? Mm-hmm. Any other siblings?
2 half brother and half sister.
Were they all involved?
No, the 2 halves were not.
Okay.
They're on my father's side.
Got you.
And I'll just say it, they religiously, they don't believe in what my mom did was okay. Okay. So it's been really tough. Yeah.
That is really
and
tough.
Did you say there's a conflict with your brother about how to do this?
We just had an afternoon that he was on call for my mom and yeah, it was awful. It was awful. So yes, I mean, like you do come together, but your shit still comes up.
But it also, I think maybe it comes up around what matters, what really matters. Yeah. Like show up.
And some of it's control. I would say a lot of it is control.
And the stress. That makes sense.
Controlling a situation where sometimes you just
controlling an uncontrollable situation.
I didn't like the way he did it because I wouldn't have done it that way, and so I lost it.
Yeah.
So your mother read the book.
So my mom read the
diagnosis.
book. Yeah, I've got the diagnosis, and I let her come to me first. After the diagnosis.
Okay.
And her husband read the book, and he was
right.
Like, yes.
But she said, I definitely want to do this. Not even a question. And so within 3 months, we created a VSED statement, which is basically bullet points of actions that were clear signs that she was closer to starting VSED. And we revised it a few times because it would change. So the first list was about when I no longer can drive a car, or when I no longer can use a microwave or cook dinner. And then those stopped. She was not able to do those things anymore, but she still could enjoy herself, have conversations with friends, still living a life that was valued, that it was something that she felt like she still had dignity and she had grace and she found beauty, but it became more and more difficult. So we knew ultimately with mom that it would be when she could not be a part of a conversation, because she was such a vocal storyteller and she wanted to be in the action. So that was going to be, there were times, especially there was, so 2019 was when she was diagnosed and she died in 23. So there was 4 years.
Wow.
And I'd say the first two, we made this plan and we just...
She drove for the first two.
Yeah, we put it to the side. We met with hospice. They were on board. So it was like, okay, we're good. We're just going to put this to the side and live a life. And we're going to go through each step and we're going to support you in this. And she would talk about it here and there, but it was often enough that people were interested. They wanted to hear about it.
Yeah.
The Star Trib heard about it. And so which was so helpful. I mean, because...
Well, especially because she likes the limelight too.
Well,
not a good listener, but likes the limelight.
Dynamic.
She's so there. She lights up a room. I mean, she's great.
Yeah.
She's great on stage.
Yeah.
She was amazing. I do have a question about the Alzheimer's diagnosis and the VSED, because if she was getting increasingly confused and losing her memory, were you needing to remind her of these things that she had once wanted, or the statement that she made of how she wants to do this? Was she able to recall and remember?
We had to make sure that she still could, we had to make sure that mom was cognitive when we were going through VSED. Otherwise, it's not legal.
I mean, obviously, these questions get asked all the time. But wait, she has Alzheimer's, so how is she going to remember? And Wendy taught me this right off the bat. That's why you have to do it before the window.
Yep.
She has to know. Oh. And she has to be aware of why she's not, she has to make this decision. No one else could have made this. And so really what she said when this list of things, reading, writing, she would just say when nothing matters anymore.
Right.
So really her days went to, I don't really want to go out with that person. I don't want to socialize, because she was very social. She watched a lot of TV and she's just like, you could just see exactly a year ago, she was getting closer and closer. And then I the way that I remember this, and it's interesting, you and I have never talked about this, but what I remember is that in April, she was with Wendy, I believe at your home, and her 2 grandchildren walked in, Wendy's 2 oldest, and she asked Wendy, who are those boys? And then she was like, okay, that's a really big sign. And then that same week, she had to deal with some insurance and some billing things. And David, her husband, called and it was on speaker, and they asked, what's your birth date? And she didn't remember. And what's your address? And she didn't remember. And like those 2 huge things was like, we have to make a plan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is happening.
And the beauty is that mom could see it on her own. And so we were really, really fortunate for that, because I know there were times that Sarah and I would be up late at night having nightmares that we were going to have to say, Mom, we have to do this now. Right. Because ultimately, and she would have been okay, I believe, but she actually, there were 2 occasions. Once when, no surprise, we were meeting with the funeral planners, and it was on the anniversary of her parents' death. She wanted to do that. Gosh. And so we sat down, and I was giving a little bit of the background to Mom's disease, and that knowing that like the time frame, it might be 2 months, it could be 6 months, somewhere around then. And right away she said, oh, it's 2 months. It's going to be closer.
I mean, it's the way I describe it to people is like, for her, she could be here and doing this a little bit, and then it's like a really bad acid trip. You could just see it. I'll never forget. Yep. We were in Kowalski's once, and she looked at me. She's like, "Where are we? Where are we? What's going on? What's going on?" I mean, can you just imagine out of the blue going on an acid trip, like a bad one?
Yeah.
And so you just
that's part 2 of this conversation. Is Doug?
That's another episode.
People going mushroom trips. I think those are more gentle.
Well, it depends. And I mean, one time when we sat as a family, I mean, she just said, "You guys, I'm having a really hard time knowing how to wipe myself." And like just those significant things, she knew. And then as we got closer to setting the date, it was she would look, at either one of us, whoever she was with, and say, "So we're gonna do this in a week or 2?" But you have to remember, she doesn't know days very well.
Right.
And by do this, go into a little.
Okay, so I mean, Wendy will obviously know way more about this, but what you do in VSED is that a week prior to the date that you are choosing to start, you bring your calories down to 500 a day to help your body.
Okay.
One of the most amazing memories that all of us never forget that we had a Last Supper. All of us grandchildren came and ate and drank and just.
What did you have?
She wanted pasta.
Oh,
And chocolate cake.
Yep.
Ooh,
that's a beautiful last
Good choice.
supper.
We talked about first, second, and third base with her 2 grandsons, and
Oh, that's so great.
yeah. And so really, we were doing very intentional things.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the social calendar. I mean, everybody wanted to come say bye, and what we really realized was it was really hard on her. Holding that space and people saying goodbye was, we have our own friends that went. It was a lot, and I don't think we would do it any differently. Because she loved it, but yeah. And then do you want to just start on, May? So May 18th was the day, but several days prior you start,
okay.
Huh?
I think it was the 22nd, wasn't it?
Somebody look it up. Thursday.
Okay, yeah.
But you meet with the care provider team. So we had hospice.
Yeah. And so in those 3 years that we first brought in hospice, the order of things had changed a little bit. And so they were needing to have a psychiatric evaluation of mom and work with palliative care for a bit before we started, which makes sense because it is not a normal thing to say, and I think that's a whole other discussion for a different time because
sure is.
I think healthcare providers are having to figure this out. And even in one large system, it depends on the doctor that you're speaking to and the relationship that you've had with this doctor for them to really understand, okay, she's being intentional. This is what she's wanted for a while.
Yep.
And I will grant her hospice.
And hospice isn't necessarily about end of life urgently anymore. It used to be considered for that.
6 months, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, but hospice, mom wasn't going to die naturally in 6 months.
That's
she would
right.
have died in a year to 2 to 3.
Oh, that's
Okay, so you do
brutal.
this last dinner and then you go down to 500 calories. And I'm kind of curious about not only the body's response to that, but the mental response to that. And I'm wondering if you might respond to that.
I mean, just in general, it's more exhaustion.
Yeah.
Obviously because of the being the social too. And
Agitation?
Well, she was on anxiety medication right away.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, you really have to have
Okay.
hospice day 1, ideally. Sometimes
Wow,
I've heard you can
okay.
start day 3 or 4 if that's your only option.
Yep.
And people maybe are already on a medication. But ideally, you have this team, you've had conversations, you have the medical equipment there.
you have a hospital bed.
Right.
It's about comfort and
It's about
managing the stress and the distress and
So, and you also have to be really thoughtful to make sure there's no food smells, any coffee smells, that all had to be outside.
Right.
We created signs on the doors, so you were intentional about coming into this space. So you left all of your, hopefully your phones, your food and drink, everything outside. You left your shoes outside. You took a deep breath. You thought of your times with mom and how grateful you were for this moment, and then walked in. So that's kind of, we were really thoughtful about that because she did love her coffee. Oh yeah. And so before I had the experience of supporting mom with VSED, I had a client 1 year ago, or a year before that, who had Huntington's disease, and he was a late 48-year-old man, and he was able to VSED in 10 days. And he did it without ever asking for water. And so I had seen that and thought, okay, maybe mom will ask, but it probably, she's going to be distracted. And when she does ask, we have a plan. And the plan is that we will be spraying bits of water in her mouth. We will be giving her cold spoons to suck. We will rub her feet. We will brush her hair. We will change the music.
Sing.
We will sing.
Constantly. There was never not music going.
Right. So we had all of these plans. What we weren't planning on is, what you don't know, is that between her dehydration, because she really wasn't drinking anything the day before either, her Alzheimer's disease in general, and then just being on stronger medication, day 1, she forgot that she wasn't supposed to be drinking, and kind of why.
I bet.
Yeah. And we would remind her, and sometimes, and she'd get pissed and she'd roll her eyes, but she'd get it. But it was not, it was not the clarity. There was some clarity the first day 1 through 3 or 4, but then it was,
went fast.
It went really fast. She didn't recognize us the second day.
Well, she thought you were her dog, let's be honest.
I did.
Her dog?
Yeah, I have it all on video. So she's
What
like,
kind of dog does she
"Hi,
have?"
Pippa." She has a dog. My mom doesn't like dogs. She's like, "Hi, Pippa," and then my mom looks at me and she goes, "I don't think that's Pippa." I was like, "No, it's Wendy." And then I lost it because, and then that next day I walked in the room and she asked Wendy who I was.
Yeah.
And that was hell. It was a hell. And yet you're like, but this is what we have to do. So yeah, the dehydration. And then day 5 was when we decided to start morphine because the agitation was too much. Yeah. She slept in her bedroom with David on the 2nd floor the first 2 nights. And then on the 3rd night, she was too weak. So and we had in-home 24-hour care. We hired a nurse.
Who had a relationship with my mom before. Mm-hmm. So my mom was very comfortable with her.
Mm-hmm. I slept there every night. My fiance slept there, the nurse, and then David, her husband, who we didn't wake up whenever there was things because she obviously by day 3 was going to the bathroom, eliminating in her bed. And we never had to do diapers, which I was really thankful for because that felt like a dignity thing.
Yeah.
But if she went, she could tell she was irritated and we'd change her. And it was the biggest shock for both of us is that we thought we'd have just like more heart-to-heart conversations. And, Wendy was going to read her eulogy, but she was we haven't brought this up yet, but the biggest thing that she said over and over again is, "I'm not scared of dying. I just don't want to leave."
Oh, that just breaks my heart.
And that feels probably so honest.
I don't want the goodbying, and so
Yes.
that was obviously the hardest part, but she was so ready. She never was scared of where she was going to go. I think she was really excited to see her parents.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful.
I mean, she really was like day 6 or 7. If she said anything, it was like, enough already.
Yeah.
Enough. Where are my parents? I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how long did this last?
9.5 days.
9.5 days.
Yeah.
So that feels fast in some ways, and yet the deprivation of nutrients, et cetera, it makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. And watch.
Yeah, well,
Do you know what the average is, by the way? I mean,
it's about that.
Is it?
I mean,
Okay.
they say 10 to 14, but it can happen. It so depends on if somebody has been sick before, and it could take 3 or 4 days. If they just hadn't been, like intentionally, they were older, or they just like no one had noticed they were eating or drinking, and then they just stopped. So it could be 3. You hear about 20 days sometimes, but I mean, when Mom had her physical a few days before,
They scared us.
Well, the doctor scared Sarah and David just because they said, her vitals are strong. She could live 20 days. I was like, if she doesn't have, I mean, it can happen, but rarely, especially if you have.
Well, and we had already
0
rented the
water.
venue for the funeral, so
Yeah,
like
there
we
is
were
that.
real stressed out.
See, let's speed this up.
Which, by the way, she planned every detail of the funeral. She
Okay,
named
I
the
love that.
cocktail. She had the playlist. She couldn't read, write, play piano, so she was an artist. So she did art her last the few years, and so we had all the art up. I mean, she picked the place that she wanted this party, and she'd go to these meetings we'd have in organizing, and she's like, "This sounds like so much fun." She's like, "Shit, I'm not going to be there." No, seriously.
I'm going to be there, but I'm not going to be there.
And just to finish, you had asked before the moment. So Mom was so planful that 2-3 hours after she had died and her body was about to be removed from her room that she had VSEDed in, her caretaker started playing this one very sort of like Italian opera emotional piece. And it was blasting from the steps. And her spouse, David, was saying, "No, Pauline, we cannot play that music. No." And then Pauline's like, "But Cheryl asked me to. She told me, I promised her I would play it when she was being removed." And then David was like, "You crazy woman. Like you still are involved in your death. And you've been gone now for 3 hours."
I mean, she took us both shopping for our funeral dresses. She bought both of our funeral dresses. Sadly, we didn't wear them.
Oh,
I know.
You know
you
what?
did.
I wanted in other occasions.
What I'm assuming is that on the other side, all of those petty earthly things are gone, and she completely understands that you needed to wear something
beyond
different.
understands. We both have been able to talk to her through a medium, and it's been life-changing. And I mean, I knew it was her because she was like, "You kind of drive me crazy sometimes."
I want to know more about like how that 9 days was for the two of you.
Sure.
And how you cope and what you do to survive that time as well.
We did different things.
This is exactly the difference. Wendy biked from Minneapolis way out to the western suburbs. It was hot. She would bike home. Sarah would usually start drinking around 2.
We heard about your belly up.
Belly up.
That is completely, and just, I mean, really, like Wendy was the orchestrator. She was like the planner. I finally, after the 5th night of sleeping with my mom, Wendy's like, you can't, because it was just too. I wasn't sleeping, because anytime she moved, I would be there. So I mean, how did? It was a dance. I mean, I wrote this, and I cannot stress this enough. Every single birth I have ever been to led me to support my mom in her death.
Yeah.
It was so similar. It was beyond crazy. And yet they're clients of mine. They're people, I love them because they're human beings. But so this was obviously very different. But the way that the dance happened, people would come in and come out, and we had a group text of the care provider, my partner, Wendy, the nurse, and then my mom's 2 best friends that were there. And we'd be like, hey, I'm gonna take an hour alone with mom at 4. Okay, you're gonna step in. Hey, my best friend came and picked me up and took me to Target, which, by the way, I've never told her this. I had a whole entire cart full of stuff. I went to the checkout, self-checkout. I did it all, and I went to the car, and I realized I never paid. I was a little out of it.
Your mom paid that.
Thank you.
She did like shoplifting, so that makes total sense.
It totally does.
Klepto.
Yep, she was a klepto. So there was this beautiful dance that would happen of like who can come and like what her energy is. And I mean, really, it's interesting because she was so out of it by the second day that she was just either in what is it called? A wheel.
Comatose? Oh,
It's like a really gorgeous wheelchair. It's a really nice one that goes up. We brought it outside, and she could be outside. She was outside one whole entire day.
Beautiful.
But she was out of it people were able to come and say goodbye, and then it gave us respite. When someone would come and they're like, can I sit with her? I'm like, do you mind? I need to go shower, or I just need to take a break. So it was this gorgeous dance of community.
It really was. No, I think between
mind-boggling.
we did a food train, which saved us.
Yeah.
So every meal. Wendy's like, we're going to get a food train for 3 meals. I was like, well, see this again. I'm going to fucking eat it, and you're not. No, but it was so amazing.
Perfect. Yeah, and that way people could be involved. And then we also, I mean, the biggest part, which we didn't foresee, was that we had decided to create a website to educate moms' friends so we could update them on every day. Yeah. And so, because there was just so many of them that we knew that it would be too hard to be texting. And that was a lifesaver. That website just grew more personal. We opened up more than I was planning on it, but it actually was really healthy and helpful for others. Yep. And so I think between always being able to always call the hospice, every day, one of the 2 doulas would show up and maybe
hospice only came every other day. That was a huge shock to me.
That's fascinating.
Well, that's yeah. I mean,
I know it's normal, but like I was like, but she's dying, and they're like, but we're not here to say,
Isn't this a full-time 24?
No, they just literally came.
They are 24 hours if you need them, but they're not going to stay there for 20 hours. But they are on the phone for 24 hours.
And they had you.
Yeah.
I mean,
that was exactly it. It's like what a nurse says to me at a birth. They're like, I feel bad. I'm not really doing anything here. And I'm like, this is why they hired me. Like, I'm here to do this. So between website, hospice, 2 death doulas that were around the clock.
And a lot of music. There was a lot of vocals that came in. We had Peter from Peter, Paul and Mary Zooming us. We had the Morning Star hospice group sing.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So every day we had different music. But then there was a day, it was the morning of day 8, where we all hit a wall. And I think we knew that mom almost was like, she kept waking up and being present because all these people were coming to see her, and I'm like, we got to stop this. Like,
well, you got like a clear hit. You were standing outside in the sun, right?
Yeah.
And you just got this clear hit of like, again, it's birth. You don't invite all these people over. We actually needed to say no visitors today. She needs to actually start going to the other side, and that was like the biggest gift that Wendy totally knew that, because in my world I was like, let's keep the party going, let's have it, and it was so great. So that was a Thursday, and then the next day, we did start on May 18th, a Thursday. Anyway,
see, Wendy.
And then the next day,
I'm not taking a side.
when the death doulas came, they were very clear. It will be between, what did they say the first time? 6 and 18 hours, something like that. 6 and 12 hours.
When her oxygen level stopped.
Yeah, I mean, they were just right there guiding us. I don't know how people do it without it.
I would like to know, in the aftermath of this, did you feel judgment from anyone? You said your half siblings struggled with the religious component of it. Were there people at the memorial or friends or family that came forward and said, I can't believe you did this to her or whatnot? I know that's a harsh question.
No, there were a few good friends of Mom's that vocalized their confusion of why she would die this way, and that it just was against their beliefs, and that they will die when God says they'll die. And Mom, thankfully there was just only a few, and it was still okay.
She even went to visit one the month before she died, and they just didn't talk about it. They just talked about old times.
Okay.
Kind of interesting, but
but that was her longest friend and then dearest friend. So it was okay. And there were some harder discussions later on in the last year with friends that maybe we thought would be there and were in a different way. So, but you do see that it's just like death, how people decide to go into death. It's so personal. So it's really hard not to judge.
I think the biggest thing we heard was, especially just being out and about, but she's so okay and she can talk and she's normal. So a lot of people, even her care provider and I had a really hard talk, the woman that was with us. She was like, but she could have 3 more great months. I'm like, you're right. And she, but like she wants this.
And this is exhausting. And she was
ready.
Can
you imagine
not
waking up and not knowing what day it is and like who you're going to see? I mean, no.
And I have a question so we want to open up to questions that people probably have. And so we're going to wrap this beautiful part up.
I don't want to.
No, we don't want to.
I'm actually really just into this. And I will say that our producer just told us what time it is, and I'm shocked.
We're shocked.
That it's already an hour and a half or so, close to. But this is a fascinating story that I think everyone can resonate with, the difficulty of talking about these issues. Again, there's a celebration. I appreciate you saying that, Sarah. There's a celebration on both ends. And I realize you two are working so beautifully together as you support each other. You might not disagree. You might not agree on the date. But we'll figure that out later and find out who's right, and we'll make sure everybody knows.
Thank you.
So they can shame the person
Sarah or Wendy?
Yeah.
It's for sure going to be Wendy. So this thing...
I can tell your confidence. I know
my mom and I have this thing, we're always certain, but we're often wrong.
Oh my God, I love that. I feel like you and I can really relate to that as well.
I'm always right, though, so we can just cut that one
right
short.
just slightly more often
Are you?
than you are. But I just don't tell you every time.
Can we keep going for a while on this and take the next half hour?
I'm superior. Well, so
Can I tell you, we didn't even go down our questions.
We have another 20 amazing questions, but I'm wondering, do we just want to do the tell me more and then open it up for questions?
I would love, I don't even want to do the tell me more. Can we skip it?
Yeah.
I'd like people to be in the moment and ask questions.
Okay, we're opening it up. Does anyone have questions?
We have a microphone, by the way, for people.
For these beautiful, brilliant ladies. Yes, there's a mic.
So I think this question kind of ties into both of your jobs, but it's technical and kind of dry. So the last 2 years I've had the unintentional honor of being like an impromptu death and birth doula for a friend that carried a baby to full term that had genital birth defects. And also my best friend's daughter gave birth like you did, Sarah, at 20 weeks. And I was there before, after, during. I'm curious as to, you both try not to bring your own personal thing into your work, and you're there just to support. How do you, and what do you know about resources, information, rights, especially, I watched a documentary one time 13 years ago after my daughter was born, Home Death on Netflix. I can't find it now. And I didn't even know that was an option for you to, in Minnesota it's legal. You probably know a lot about it, Wendy. You can have your people, if there's no foul play or anything, at home and do that process by yourself. You can even bury people in your yard if you do it the right way and have land. So how do you approach your clients without putting your desire into it and offering resources, information, and them knowing their rights?
Well, we live in a city that has a lot of resources. So I often send them to the Minnesota Death Collaborative, because on there There's resources to green burials. And I think what you start seeing too is that places like Lakewood Cemetery, like death is cool. I'm just saying, like, it really is, like, the young people, the energy around it. I mean, that sounds, I don't even know how that sounds. But
I like that reframe. I'm having a really hard time buying what you're saying.
Oh, really? Now. Okay. So people,
how cool is death?
No, I know. By saying death is cool, I mean, death is an interesting topic that people are really wanting to focus on because they want to be giving people choices, because they want, if you do want to have a green burial, if you do want to die at home, these are all possible things.
Can you tell us what a green burial is?
Well, there's so many layers of green burials. So
tell them about Mom.
Well, Mom decided that she wanted to not be cremated by fire, but by water. So that's a new way
Aquamation.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know this.
No, I've never heard of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I think, and she would have had it sort of either way, but it was nice because this way it was a little, especially since her parents had died in a plane crash. We thought, Mom, this is like, nice because you're actually, your body isn't being burned, and it's like, there's acid in there, but it is all like it. And she wanted, for Mom, she wanted to have her ashes spread in places that meant something, but that sounded not so thoughtful as saying death is cool. So you should maybe edit that out. But my point is that it's just
people
like
are talking about it.
Yeah. So people it's not the fact that someone even thinks that it's not okay to die at home is a shocker to me. That and maybe that wouldn't have been a shocker 5-10 years ago. So I have to keep opening my mind to like how, not closed-minded, but how our society has been for so long, where you die in a hospital after fighting for your life, and then your body will go to a morgue, and then you will go to an open casket ceremony. And you don't have to do any of that in that order, or all of you can just decide, we're not going to have a ceremony, or I want to die at home. And you can, of course, you can hope these things, and I'm not saying that always happens, but to go back to your question, there's you hit on many things, so I would have to kind of redirect you for specific ones. But I think now that there are communities that are really open to talk about it, if I don't know that person, or if I don't have that information, I can get you that information.
And we can put everything in the show notes too. I'm thinking that this is going to go out on the 30th, and I will make sure that whatever resources these two lovely ladies are putting out there today, I'm going to have in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just address the piece about you saying, like, we bringing in our own stuff and how do we separate that. What I've really, really learned is that when I can sit and ask the right questions and then pause and listen, which can be challenging. Stop talking, Sarah.
Your mother taught you that.
Exactly. When I keep saying, tell me more. When you say that, I hear you say this. Am I hearing you correctly? And then you can actually pull back the layers to realize that, no, actually they really do want this choice or this choice. And so again, it's that tour guide where they're saying, well, no, I really do want lasagna. I really do want lasagna. I'm like, okay, well, I want to let you know the place that you're going to do this, they actually don't know how to make lasagna. They only know how to make stir fry. And so I just am constantly giving those resources and information. But most importantly, I want them to hear what they are saying. Because if I can say what I hear you say is, then, especially if it's a couple, talk about a couple thing, because then the partner will be like, wait, what? Yeah, they talk about like weird events. A woman hired me for her cesarean birth, and I went to meet, and the husband didn't know that that's what she wanted. And he's like, no, we are not having a cesarean. I was So, it's peeling back like really what their intention is. And then the big one is, and what if that doesn't happen? Because planning, as we know. Yeah.
The universe laughs.
It does. Good laugh.
Another question?
This has been really fascinating. I think you need a now what and that now what episode for afterbirth and the after death and everything you've planned for getting up to that point. But then,
are you volunteering?
No, I'm not at all. Nobody wants me to do
I
that.
heard him volunteer.
But my question is for Wendy, really related to the and now what, and how you coach conversations or lead conversations with family members that have differences in religious beliefs about what happens after. When my grandfather passed away, he was a devout atheist, and I grew up in a very, very deeply religious family. It was just never spoken about. We all knew it, but nobody ever spoke about it. And I know that's one of the things that keeps a lot of people in my family from healing because according to their beliefs, they have a belief of where he is. We all know that's not the case, but it keeps a lot of people from healing. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about that conversation, preparing for death, mm-hmm. when there might be differences of opinion about what happens after.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
Now, my first gut, and thank you for sharing that, is it's a lot about stories, because ultimately, it's about your grandfather's legacy. And so you're never going to, well, you might not change anyone's opinion about what's happening to him after and afterlife, and if he's coming back as somebody, or he's with you now, but where he still plays into your lives now. I think you all could relate to that, between mannerisms and things he taught your family, and traditions for sure. Rituals has a lot to do with it. So pausing on his birthday or the anniversary of his death, I think it's just, we don't do a lot of that, grief is just such a massive, it's a topic that people don't like to bring up, but it's also like we live with grief every day for all different reasons. We
always.
Always,
it's
right?
everywhere. Yep.
Yeah, which is why I do highly recommend the Anderson Cooper podcast, by the way.
Yep.
It is incredible because he really knocks it out. Francis Weller, I think it was the second one he did. It's beautiful. But yeah, I think you can't push it. You're not going to change your family's religious aspects on what's happening, but you can but you can honor him the way you can create your own altar for your grandfather, and it doesn't have to be just on Day of the Dead or just on his birthday. I would talk to him. I would keep him alive in your life as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. I would add a couple things to this as well. My graduate research was on the use of ritual in the grieving process for persons dying of HIV and AIDS, and what I found interesting, Ryan, to go off your question, is that everyone I interviewed for this qualitative research had a very clear sense of what was going to happen. Like their sense of spirituality had intensified dramatically in their final days. Like they felt that connection. They were seeing members of their family come into the room. I remember every time I went to go visit one of my clients in adult foster care for persons living with HIV, that person would see somebody come in the corner. And I'm like, can you tell me who you're seeing? And he's like, it's my mom. I'm like, I'm really freaked out, but I'm also really grateful because it was very peaceful for this person to have that experience. And what I would say also in terms of as a therapist working with these issues, we help families talk about it. Everyone gets to have their own point of view, but the person is gone and everyone gets to believe what they get to believe. I think it's unfortunate there's conflict about that because it would be so much more supportive to be able to be there for one another in that way.
And then it makes me wonder if the missing piece is also forgiveness. That, forgiveness of whom? Of the judgy family members, of the way, whatever it is, it's in all of us. It's the grudges we hold and the anger we have. It's only really hurting us.
Yeah.
And so you're right. No one's going to change their mind about what's happening, but you can rise above and honor him the way that feels good to you. And it says more about them than it says about anybody else.
Or you could just refer them to our podcast a year
yes.
ago.
I think you were going to say refer them to us, and I was going to say no, thank you.
No, thank you. This is what I will say, though, and it's funny, you guys, if anybody has seen our Kaya episode a year ago on Halloween, the psychic was on, and I said, all right, there's no way that Donald Trump goes where I go after this death. Where does he go and where do I go? And she said, you're going to hate my answer. We all go to the same place. I'm like, nope, I do hate your answer. Right. I want a different one. But she kind of said we all go to the same place, and I remember thinking, oh, I hate that answer. I kind of want to fuck off a little bit more. I want to rip off people a little bit more, but I don't. That would not make me feel good about this life. But I hated the answer. And she said, well, that's what the answer is.
That's what it is. Too bad.
It's called the source.
You have to pay extra for a different answer.
Yeah, I kind of don't like it. I'm like, but I live well. I treat other people well. I try anyway. So yeah, have them listen to the podcast and they'll freak out.
Anybody else have a question?
This may be a really short question or answer based on your experience, but given the number of people that have trouble having children or families that may go through surrogacy or adoption, have you ever been in a situation and had to deal with the nuances and dual families in a room?
That's a lovely question.
I was going to say, where's Sarah Branyan out there? So we, as a birth doula for, 2+ decades, I just had this discussion. One of the hardest ones is when a family's going through a divorce and one of them is birthing. That's the real tricky one, because they are pregnant, they chose this child, they're married, or maybe they didn't choose the child, they're married and they're navigating a divorce. Does that partner come? Do they not? Does it trigger them? So there's that. There is the adoption piece, which is huge. So Sarah Branyan. So I really check out my Belly Up podcast all about surrogacy, because we have someone who was a surrogate, Sarah, and then someone who had adopted. Is it technically called adopted? No.
Sure.
Intended parents. I'm trying to water down your question a little bit more to get a clear understanding. In situations such as that, in situations such as loss, definitely infertility, people who have struggled and have lost and struggled and had lost, a doula is even more crucial. Because what we know is that with multiple losses, one loss, and with any type of fertility journey, they wait so long to get pregnant. This is what they've been wanting. That the actual pushing stage and literally opening their pelvis, opening their body to birth is very, very difficult, because there's a sense of I've been wanting this. I don't know if I can do this. So it adds a whole other layer. And it's one where I would personally suggest a doula who has been around the block, who knows how to hold that space. And if it's not, maybe if you don't have access to a more veteran doula, maybe there are other resources and community groups. So did I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Come talk about it.
Yeah. You guys, this was the most beautiful conversation. We are so grateful.
Thank you.
It couldn't have been better. And we laughed, we cried. The questions were
I did not
amazing.
cry.
Thank
Did
you
you
so
cry,
much.
really?
I cried thrice.
Okay, thrice. I did not.
Did you see? This was like a dangling from my...
I missed
But
you.
it's
I'm
not
sorry.
stuck to your cheek this time. That's
I know.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, last time I had a piece of toilet paper or something stuck to my cheek, and everyone was talking to me like everything was fine. Well, guess what? We're not fine.
I think too, after this segment, like if I were to do like a whole workshop out of this, we would do a writing exercise of what scares you at birth, what excites you about birth, what scares you about death, what excites you about death. And just like, that's what we actually really need to do, is peel back the layers of, because I can sit right here next to this amazing person who I know I'll die before her for sure. She'll guide me to the next realm.
It's the alcohol versus biking.
You have no idea. You have no idea. And Doritos, and I don't work out. I can go on and on. I don't I think where I'm going, like my mom is pretty cool, but like I really don't, I'm scared to death. And I watched it.
And that's why she needs a death journal. So that will be the next thing, to have a death journal. Everyone needs to have a death journal.
What do you recommend people write about?
I'll do it.
Well, but let's talk about death journal. What do you recommend people write?
The death journal will have things that you want people to know about you. So if something did happen to me on my way home today, then my husband isn't looking and trying to figure out what was that poem that she liked? What was that song that she liked?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. What does she really want to be remembered for?
Is your service going to be like mom's and be 2 hours long?
Can I have
It'll be a weekend at your cabin.
Service at a safari?
Yeah.
I'm going to start planning right now.
Yeah.
Should we place bets on which four of us in order? No,
Seriously.
I'm going to die first. Anyway.
Have us back. Please have us back.
Yeah, let's do
This
this
is
again.
a hard conversation to actually end. I feel like I have a million more questions for both of you.
We're not going anywhere.
I've kind of been mesmerized by so many nuances that I have in terms of questions. I love you both. Thank you so much. I did not know either of you before this. My friend Sarah Meslow, by the way, Campo Dan, is like, please say hi to Sarah. So everyone knows you guys, and everyone's like telling me, like, say hi to them. So I'm really grateful for the two of you joining us. This was a blast. Thank you again, Nick, for having us here. This audience is fantastic.
The
I feel
best
like
audience we've ever had.
They've had two.
Out of two.
Out of two.
That's
but
right.
most of the people that were here the first time are here. Some of them are back.
Some are. That's a good compliment
Some
to us.
stopped listening
They
to
weren't
us
sick of us.
probably.
Yeah.
No.
That's really great.
thank you so much for coming out and watching. I hope that the rental chairs were comfortable and the mocktails and cocktails that
And the
my
Purple Rain and Pain were
glorious
good.
husband
Yep.
made back there. Good job, Rob.
Thank you, bartender Rob.
Can I say one more thing? I was going to add
One more thing Wendy
I
wants
was
to add.
going to say, if you're interested in grabbing a postcard to write to your representative or senator, there are postcards in the back left to the bar regarding End of Life Option Act for Minnesota. So
Grab a stack.
Please,
Also,
please
one more
reach
thing.
out if you believe you want that as an option. Doesn't mean
Wendy
you have
and
to
I
take
have
it.
a very best friend. It's her 51st birthday today, and she's our biggest cheerleader for all birth and all death and everything. So a huge shout out to Jennifer David, but also to all of our, Wendy and I have a group of friends that got us through this. I mean, it is.
We all need community.
It
for
is
sure.
huge. It is huge.
Yep.
So big thanks to them and our significant others.
Thanks, Sarah. You're right.
Thank you.
Yay, thank you.